Silence comes before victory is ever named. Across fields, still marked by cannon tracks and retreating footprints, there is no triumph and no cheering crowds. Only survivors remain, standing between an old order that has collapsed and a new one that has not yet taken shape. The empire that once commanded the oceans has accepted defeat, not through total destruction, but through withdrawal that is quiet, deliberate, and final. The small colonies it once governed, long dismissed as fragmented and ungovernable, now face a question larger than the war itself. They have won, but can they endure as a nation? When this war began,
get those crates
the
aboard,
balance
quick
of
now,
power
we haven't
was
all day.
Unmistakably uneven. On one side stood the greatest empire of the 18th century, armed with a dominant navy, a professional army, global combat experience, and financial resources drawn from across the world. On the other stood 13 colonies with no real unity, no standing army in the modern sense, no reliable funding, and no strong central government. Even among the colonists, many believed
the British fleet
resistance
maintained a
was
formidable
reckless,
presence off the
perhaps even
coast,
suicidal.
a constant reminder
Those
of the
who
Crown's
supported
power.
independence were often unsure of what they were fighting to build, beyond resisting imperial control. So what reversed the outcome? How did a force weaker in manpower, poorer in resources, and divided in politics compel an empire to step back? Was this a victory of ideals, of liberty and principle, or merely the result of strategic miscalculations by the opposing side? Or was the war decided not by a single decisive battle, but by a long chain of decisions
not till Tuesday,
stretched
if the
across
mud
years,
allows,
where each choice quietly narrowed the range of possible endings?
The key to taking
This
Philadelphia
video
lies
moves
here,
backwards
along the
through
Brandywine.
time,
We press
returning
the
to
left
moments
flank,
when
while the main
failure
force moves
appeared
north.
inevitable. It does not treat victory as legend, nor independence as destiny. Instead, it examines the slow erosion of imperial power, confronted by the adaptability of people who were never prepared to lead a revolution. The focus here is not on symbols, but on individuals, not on slogans, but on strategy, not on glory, but on decisions and their consequences. Because this nation was not born from one triumphant moment.
Keep the line
It
moving,
emerged
lads.
from the
Steady
measurable
now.
breakdown
We'll be
of
aboard
an
before the
empire
tide turns.
and from the capacity of those who opposed it to learn, to adjust, and to endure. What followed was not merely the end of a war, but the beginning of a far more
Under the
difficult
ever-present
task.
gray sky of the Ohio
question of whether
frontier,
victory could
daily
be
life was a
transformed
relentless
into
struggle
a
against the
lasting
elements and the
political order
ongoing conflict.
would ultimately define the true meaning of independence. At the outbreak of war, the American side entered the conflict from a position that could hardly be described as viable. The colonies did not begin as a nation, nor even as a unified political body. They were 13 separate societies, linked by shared grievances rather than shared institutions.
These resolves clearly
There was
state
no
our
permanent
position.
army,
There is no
established
turning back
command
now,
structure,
gentlemen.
and no reliable system for funding a
By the right,
prolonged
forward
war.
march. Keep that
What
line
existed
straight, you there.
instead was a loose
can't hear him. What'd
collection of
he say?
militias,
Halt! Halt,
local
I say!
loyalties, and a belief that resistance had become unavoidable. Material weakness defined the early months of the conflict. Weapons were scarce and uneven in quality. Ammunition supplies were inconsistent. Training varied widely from colony to colony. Many soldiers were
48,
farmers
49,
and laborers
50.
who had never experienced
Not much to hold the line with.
battlefield maneuvering. Enlistments were often short-term, which meant units dissolved just as experience began to accumulate. Even basic logistics such as food, uniforms, and medical care could not be guaranteed. In several early campaigns, American forces retreated not because they were defeated tactically, but because they could no longer sustain themselves in the field. Across the field stood an opponent of an entirely different scale. The British Empire possessed the most experienced military apparatus of its era. Its army was professional, disciplined, and accustomed
Position
to
is untenable.
operating
We
far
withdraw at
from
dawn.
home.
That is madness, sir.
Its
We must
navy
engage them now while we have the advantage
controlled
of the
sea
fog. We
lanes,
barely have powder enough for an
allowing
hour's fight.
troops,
The
supplies,
offers the best
and
vantage, Captain.
intelligence
Aye,
to
but
move
crossing the
with
creek will
relative
cost us time.
security. Britain
mud is
could
too deep.
choose where to apply
Hold
pressure,
the line! Steady,
when
men!
to withdraw, and how long to sustain operations.
They're breaking through.
In purely conventional terms,
Keep
the
moving, they're
outcome
close.
appeared
To the left, through the
predictable.
brush. Hurry,
Early
don't stop.
engagements reflected this imbalance. American commanders initially attempted to fight in traditional European formations, seeking decisive confrontations that would prove legitimacy. These efforts exposed their vulnerabilities rather than their resolve. Fixed positions were difficult
Swab
to
the
hold.
barrel, quickly now.
Command coordination broke down under
Powder
pressure.
cartridge ready,
Losses,
Sergeant.
while not always catastrophic, carried disproportionate consequences because replacements were slow and uncertain. Morale fluctuated sharply, especially when early optimism collided with the realities of sustained warfare. Leadership itself was still forming. Civilian authorities debated the scope of military power, while generals struggled to impose
Dispatch from
discipline
General
on
Green,
forces
sir.
that viewed
I regret the
themselves
delay.
as
The roads were
citizens
impassable.
first and
This
soldiers
news is already
second.
3 days old.
Strategy lacked coherence because the political objective of independence had not yet been translated into a clear military doctrine. Was the goal to defeat British armies outright, to hold territory, or simply to survive long enough for circumstances to change? In these early stages, no consensus existed.
The ranks
This
are thinner than
unfavourable
expected, Major.
beginning
Aye, sir.
did not merely
We've
place
lost
the
nearly a
American
third this
cause
month.
at risk of
We
defeat.
must make do.
It shaped the character of the war itself. The recognition of weakness forced choices that would later define success. Survival became more important than spectacle. Avoidance replaced confrontation. Time emerged as a resource more valuable than territory. The opening phase closed not with victory, but with the realization that continuing the war in familiar ways would ensure failure. The failure to achieve early success forced a reassessment of how the war could be fought. American leaders gradually accepted that conventional victory on European terms was unrealistic.
The river is
The
impassable.
objective
We have to
shifted
move south.
from winning
What about the Hessians at the
decisive
crossroads?
battles
We avoid
to
them.
avoiding
Survival is the
decisive
priority.
defeat. This change
The river
in
crossing
thinking
here is
did
too
not
exposed.
occur instantly, nor
We
without
can cut through the
resistance.
woods,
It
bypass the
emerged
main
from
road.
repeated encounters with the limits
Strike
of
those
their
tents
own
now. We
capacity
move in 5 minutes.
and the
Hurry it up,
advantages
man.
of their opponent. One of the earliest lessons concerned survival. Maintaining an army in the field became the central priority. Commanders learned that preserving experienced soldiers
Move up,
mattered
skirmishers.
more than
Take that
holding
ridge line.
ground that
Steady
could not
now.
be
Watch your
defended.
flank.
Retreat, once seen as weakness, became a calculated tool. By disengaging before destruction, American forces
All right,
denied
men,
the
move
British
up and keep
the kind
low.
of clear victory that could end the war politically. Time itself began to function as a strategic asset. Organizational adaptation followed. The Continental
intelligence
Army
is
moved
critical.
slowly towards
Ride to General Green.
standardization.
Inform him we
Training
move at
became
dawn.
more
Yes, sir.
consistent. Discipline,
Move those
though
crates
never
lively now.
absolute,
We haven't got all day.
Careful with that
Leadership
grain, it's all we
learned
have left.
To balance authority with the realities of a citizen army. Punishment alone could not enforce order, but neither could idealism sustain cohesion. A functional middle ground emerged, one that accepted imperfection while demanding reliability under pressure.
Company,
Logistics,
halt.
long
Right
neglected,
base. Present arms.
received renewed attention. Supply networks were decentralized to reduce
We
vulnerability.
cannot hold this position, Captain.
Local
We withdraw to the
procurement
ridge immediately. All
supplemented
companies, fall back in
unreliable
good order.
central distribution. While
Steady, men,
shortages
by the right
persisted,
flank.
the army
Watch your
became
intervals.
more
Keep moving
resilient
back
to
calmly
disruption.
now.
It could operate in smaller units, disperse when necessary, and reassemble without collapsing entirely. This flexibility contrasted sharply with the British reliance on long supply lines that stretched across the Atlantic.
Fall back quickly
Strategic
now.
thinking also evolved. American commanders began to exploit geography rather than contest it. Dense forests, poor roads, and vast distances hindered British manoeuvring more than colonial movement. Familiarity with the land allowed for harassment, intelligence gathering, and selective engagement. Battles were chosen carefully, often for their political or
press.
psychological
Present
impact,
arms.
rather than
Their
their
timing is
tactical
much
purity.
better now, Sergeant. Charge,
Leadership
bayonet.
maturation played a critical role.
We must
Civilian
secure the
and
northern route
military
immediately,
authorities
Colonel. The
gradually
supplies cannot
clarified
wait.
their
Agreed.
respective responsibilities.
I'll dispatch a company by
While
dusk.
tensions remained, the separation between political objectives and military execution became more defined. This reduced internal
All together
friction
now.
at critical
Heave.
moments. The army was no longer
Move that
merely
wagon.
reacting to events. It was learning to shape them within narrow but growing limits. By the end of this phase, the American position had not dramatically
An
improved
immediate
in
assault would
material
cost too many
terms.
lives. We must
Weapons
wait.
remained
Agreed,
scarce.
General. We hold the line
Funding
and let
remained
winter do our work.
uncertain. Victory still seemed distant. Yet the nature of the war had changed. The conflict was no longer being fought on terms set entirely by the British Empire. Adaptation had transformed weakness into a form of endurance.
We cannot hold this
The question
position
was
without
no longer
reinforcements.
whether
They
the
won't arrive in
colonies
time,
could win
sir.
quickly,
The French
but
are
whether
already
the Empire
flanking our
could
left.
afford to keep fighting a war that refused to conclude. By the third year of the war, the conflict had entered a phase of uncertainty. The American side had learned how to survive, but survival alone could not secure independence. Endurance delayed defeat, yet it did not guarantee
Push
victory.
harder, lads.
What
We'll
was
be
missing
stuck here until
was
sundown.
a moment that could transform
Heave,
a
you
prolonged
dogs, heave!
rebellion into a credible
No good,
war
sirs.
between states.
We're properly bogged down.
That transformation came not from a single battlefield
The provincials
success,
will not expect
but
us to
from a
cross the river here.
convergence of military
We shall surprise them
outcome
by
and
morning.
political
Indeed,
consequence.
a
The
decisive
campaign
strategy.
that culminated in Saratoga marked this shift. British strategy aimed to isolate New England by advancing southward from Canada while coordinating with forces moving north from New York. On paper, the plan promised efficiency and control. In practice, coordination failed. Communication delays, terrain challenges, and rigid assumptions undermined
Face the
execution.
woods.
The advancing
Ready your
British
pieces.
force
Do
became
not advance
increasingly
without order.
isolated,
Right, form up.
operating far from
First
reliable
rank,
support
kneel and present
while
arms.
surrounded by hostile territory. American commanders did not
Steady
attempt to
now, men.
annihilate the opposing
Prepare to
army
fire on my
through
command.
frontal assault. Instead, they
Dig in
applied pressure
deeper.
incrementally. Supply lines were disrupted, movement was constrained, engagements were selective rather than decisive. Each action reduced British options without exposing American forces to catastrophic loss. The result
We cannot
was not
advance through
a
there. The
dramatic
terrain is
battlefield
impossible.
triumph,
And the supplies,
but a
General.
gradual
We
tightening
simply do
of
not have the
conditions
provisions to
that
hold
left
this
the
position.
British
Move the
commander
regiment along
with
this ridge.
diminishing
We must cut
alternatives.
off their supply
When
route, not
surrender
engage
finally
directly.
occurred,
Yes, sir. I'll
its
see it done.
significance exceeded the immediate military
Make sure that
outcome.
powder stays
The
dry,
captured
lads.
force
Aye, aye.
represented a substantial portion
Are the
of
rations
British
being handed out
operational
today?
strength in the theatre. More importantly, it provided tangible proof that imperial armies could be compelled to yield under sustained pressure. This mattered less to soldiers in the field than to observers across the Atlantic. For foreign powers watching closely, the war had previously appeared uncertain and risky. Supporting the American cause carried the danger of backing a losing side. Saratoga altered that calculation. It demonstrated that the rebellion had crossed the threshold. It was no longer a colonial disturbance, but a conflict capable of reshaping the balance of power. Diplomatic recognition and material support followed, not out of idealism, but out of strategic interest. Britain could not prevent this shift because its own framework limited
Terms are
adaptation.
accepted, sir.
The campaign
See that your
relied
men
on
lay down their
assumptions
arms
of control
immediately.
that no longer held. Commanders expected local loyalty that failed to materialize. They underestimated the cumulative effect of sustained resistance. Most
We have
critically,
word that the loyalists
they
are
treated
coming.
the war as a
We must
problem
move
to be
quickly before
solved
dawn.
militarily, while it was increasingly being decided politically. The turning point, then, was not victory in the conventional sense. It was validation.
Yeah, right,
The
Wellington.
American cause
This
gained
route avoids the main
legitimacy,
British patrols
resources,
entirely.
and time.
It is
The
perilous
British
but
position
swift.
lost
Funds for the
inevitability.
alliance are secure, Mr.
From this
Dubois.
moment
Aye,
onward,
Quartermaster.
the
12,000
war
leaves,
expanded
accounted for in the
beyond
ledger.
colonial boundaries.
See it loaded immediately.
It became entangled
The world
in
is
global
watching.
rivalries
Our
and
failure here
strategic
would extinguish the lamp of
calculations
liberty
that
for
Britain could
generations.
not easily
We must
disengage
hold
from.
this position.
After Saratoga,
We cannot
the
hold this
conflict
position if
no
the French
longer
commit
moved
their
toward
fleet.
resolution.
The situation in the
It
Caribbean is
widened.
equally dire,
What
General.
had begun
We
as an
must
effort to
prioritize.
suppress rebellion
Its foothold in
now
the Caribbean
demanded
is
the
critical,
defense of
Colonel.
imperial
It forces
interests
London
on
to divert
multiple
resources.
fronts.
We must
The
act
balance of
decisively
pressure
before the
began
winter
to
sets
shift.
in.
Not sharply,
The winter
but
encampments were
decisively.
brutal.
Yet the conflict
question
was
was no
far
longer
from over.
whether the
As the
American
lines on the
side
map
could
show,
survive,
the war was
but
only
whether the
widening.
British Empire
We hold the line
could
here,
afford
it
the
forces
cost
them to
of
reconsider the
continuing
flank.
war.
But what of the French support?
As the war
We must
expanded
press the
beyond
advantage
North
while the rivers are
America,
low.
British decision-makers faced a conflict increasingly misaligned with their assumptions. The Empire had entered the war expecting a limited campaign to
Turning
restore
point was not a
order.
grand victory,
What it
but
encountered
this grim
instead
endurance.
was a prolonged struggle that demanded
We must secure this
sustained
crossing point
attention,
before the winter sets in.
resources,
The
and
distance is
political
manageable.
clarity.
I agree, Colonel.
The
The
failure to
terrain favours us
recognise
here.
this shift in time
Colonists
proved
pose no
costly.
real threat,
One of the
merely
most
a rabble
significant
without proper
misjudgments
leadership.
lay
Indeed,
in the
General Howe
underestimation
will have
of
them
political
routed by
endurance.
winter.
British
They've concentrated
leaders
their
believed
forces
that
here,
continued
near the
pressure
city.
would fracture
The
colonial
map shows
resolve.
nothing of the Western
They
Territory.
expected
A dangerous
economic
gamble, sir.
disruption, military setbacks, and civilian hardship to erode support for independence. Instead, the opposite occurred. Each extension of the war reinforced the perception that reconciliation on previous terms was impossible. What began as resistance hardened into commitment. Strategic overconfidence compounded the problem.
Push harder on that
British
wheel.
commanders
Steady now,
assumed
move!
superiority would eventually
Watch the mud
impose
there.
itself, even without decisive victory. This belief
All right, men,
encouraged
heave.
incremental operations
Put your backs into
that
it.
consumed
Move!
resources without delivering resolution. Territory was taken and abandoned repeatedly, producing movement without progress.
They vanish every
Control
time
of
we
major
approach.
cities
Are we
failed
chasing
to
ghosts,
translate
Major?
into
The
control
fog
of
is
the
too thick,
countryside,
Colonel. We see
where
nothing clear.
resistance adapted and persisted.
If we withdraw now,
Logistical
this entire
strain
campaign has
further
been for
weakened
naught. We must
effectiveness.
strike.
And if we
Supplying
overextend,
large
General, we lose
forces
the war.
across the
The men are
Atlantic
exhausted.
required precise
By order of the new
coordination
ministry, all
and
previous
significant
directives are
expense.
hereby suspended.
As the war
We are to hold this
widened
position
to include
indefinitely.
European theatres,
Move
naval
those supplies to
protection
the eastern
and
trench
colonial
now.
defence
I said
elsewhere,
move now. The
priorities
eastern trench is
competed.
already taken, sir.
Resources
We were told to
diverted to one
retreat.
front, diminished pressure on another. The Empire was forced to manage multiple strategic obligations simultaneously,
They saw nothing.
diluting its
We'd best be
ability to
going.
concentrate
Hey, let's
force
move quiet.
where it mattered most. Internal divisions also played a role. Political leadership in Britain struggled to define a consistent war aim. Some favoured conciliation, others escalation. Shifts in government policy translated into uncertainty on the
Naval
ground.
resources diverted
Commanders
to other
operated
global
under changing
commitments.
expectations, unsure whether they were enforcing authority, negotiating
Heave ho, men!
compliance, or
Secure
simply
that cannon
delaying
before we
withdrawal.
lose her. Aye, sir.
This
Pull
ambiguity
harder.
limited initiative and coherence. Perhaps the most
Red
damaging
coats, take
error
cover.
was the
Get
failure
down,
to
load your
adapt
fire alarm.
strategy to a war that had ceased to be purely military. British planning
Another field
remained
won,
centered
another
on
war
battlefield
prolonged.
outcomes.
They'll just
while
raise
the
another
conflict
regiment by the solstice.
increasingly revolved around legitimacy, alliance, and attrition. Each year of fighting strengthened foreign involvement and increased the cost of
Please do that.
disengagement.
The cost of this prolonged
Victory,
conflict is
even if
untenable,
achieved
General. We're
tactically,
bleeding
promised
resources.
little
We must restore
strategic
order,
relief.
Colonel. Retreat
By
is not an
contrast,
option.
the American side benefited from asymmetry. Prolongation favoured those with less to lose and more time to gain. British misjudgments
Come on, men, put your backs into it.
transformed
It's useless, sir.
superiority
She won't
into
budge.
burden. Power that could not be applied decisively
Hold the line, men.
became an obligation
Steady.
rather
Wait
than
for
an
the command to
advantage.
fire.
By this stage, the war no longer hinged
The British
on
are
isolated
advancing on the right flank.
campaigns.
Move up,
It
quickly!
rested on sustainability. The Empire faced a conflict that demanded far more than
We are
it was
exposed on the
prepared
left
to
flank,
invest.
and the provisions
Its
are running
mistakes
low.
did not guarantee American
We cannot
victory,
hold this position,
but
General.
they removed the conditions under which imperial success remained plausible. The path forward narrowed, not because of a single
The supply
defeat,
lines are stretched
but
thin,
because of
and for what?
accumulated
We gain nothing by
miscalculations
waiting here.
that could no longer be corrected. As the war entered
supply
its
lines
later
are completely
years,
cut off
the
here,
American
sir.
position
Yes.
rested not on any single
There is no
advantage,
viable path
but on the
forward.
interaction of multiple forces that reinforced one another. None of these elements alone could have secured victory. Together, they created a structure of resilience that the opposing side struggled to dismantle. Human endurance formed the foundation. Soldiers, officers, and civilians had adapted to the expectation of prolonged hardship. Service in the army became less a temporary disruption and more a sustained commitment. Though morale fluctuated, the acceptance of sacrifice became normalized. This shift reduced the psychological leverage that British pressure once exerted. Hardship no longer signaled impending
From General
collapse.
Washington. See it
Public
delivered
support played
upstream.
a parallel
Hey, quickly
role.
now.
While
Mind the
loyalty to
controls.
independence was not universal, enough of the population provided material assistance, intelligence, and shelter to sustain resistance. The war embedded itself
Keep that
in
steel
daily
clean.
life.
We might need it yet.
Farms supplied
Hope the
food,
quartermaster sends blankets soon.
communities repaired roads and ferries. Information
We must
moved
secure the high
through
ground before
informal
nightfall, Mr.
networks
Hancock. The militia is
faster
stretched
than
thin,
official
General.
channels.
We can spare only 2 companies.
This
It will have to
social
suffice.
infrastructure
Send word immediately.
compensated
These turnips look
for
fit for a king's
institutional
ransom.
weakness.
They'll cost ye.
Economic improvisation
Coin or
contributed
continentals?
quietly but decisively. Formal financing remained unstable, yet the colonies developed ways to function without centralized abundance. Local
Where are
production
you two
expanded
bound in such a
where
hurry?
imports
Are those
failed.
provisions for the militia?
Barter
We're farmers heading to
supplemented
market,
currency.
same as yesterday.
Dependency
Leave us be.
shifted inward. While this did not create prosperity, it reduced vulnerability to blockade and disruption. Survival economies favored persistence over efficiency. Geography continued to shape outcomes. The physical scale of the colonies imposed
the
limits
wagons
on
moving,
conventional
men!
occupation. Control
Hey, come
required
on, get up
presence, and presence demanded resources that could not be sustained everywhere at once. Terrain constrained movement and favored familiarity. Roads, rivers, and settlements formed a landscape where resistance could disperse and reassemble, absorbing pressure without breaking. Leadership coherence matured across military and political spheres. Experience clarified
step, men.
roles. Civil
Red coats
authority
won't wait for the
increasingly
thaw.
set objectives, while military command focused on execution. This separation reduced internal conflict and enabled long-term planning. Strategic patience
Rust on the
replaced
hammer. See that it's
reactive
cleaned
impulse.
immediately. We must be
Decisions
ready
were
when called upon,
evaluated for
regardless of the weather.
sustainability rather than immediate
My
gain.
platoons, make
These
ready!
elements reinforced one another. Public support sustained the army. Geographic familiarity enhanced logistical flexibility. Economic adaptation reduced dependence. Leadership stability allowed endurance to translate into strategic continuity. Each factor amplified the others, creating a system that absorbed shocks rather than collapsing. By contrast, the opposing side faced the inverse load. Each year of continuation increased cost, complexity, and exposure. Resources expended did not yield proportional control. What appeared as American weakness became a form of structural advantage.
Secure
The
those
war
provisions.
favoured the side
We move
that
out
could
now.
persist
Keep the
without
place steady,
resolution.
lads.
By this stage, victory was no longer defined by defeating an enemy force.
Through the
It was
mud and the
defined
biting
by
cold, the
remaining
army
intact,
pressed on.
while the opponent
Their endurance
exhausted
becoming
its
their
capacity
greatest
to
weapon.
impose an outcome. Strength in this context meant cohesion over time. The American cause had not become overwhelmingly powerful. It had become difficult to defeat. That distinction would prove decisive as the war approached its conclusion. The war did not end with a sweeping victory or a decisive collapse. It concluded through a convergence of exhaustion, constraint,
Watch the bluff.
and
Stay alert, men.
inevitability. By the time British forces were encircled at Yorktown, the outcome was less a surprise than a confirmation of trends already in motion. The battlefield merely revealed what years of strategic pressure had made unavoidable. The British position had narrowed steadily. Military operations depended increasingly on naval coordination and external supply. When those links weakened, flexibility disappeared. At Yorktown, the inability to reinforce or evacuate trapped forces transformed a difficult situation into an irreversible one. The surrender that followed was not the result of overwhelming force, but of constrained options. No viable alternative remained.
We are cut off, sir. There's
For
no way
the
around their
American
batteries.
side,
We could try the
this
northern
moment
route.
did
Useless.
not represent
Our only move
triumph
now
in
is
the
a strategic
conventional
withdrawal
sense.
while we still can.
The army that stood victorious was still undersupplied, heavily indebted, and uncertain of the future. Losses accumulated over years of campaigning could not be undone. Families were displaced. Communities were fractured. Economic disruption persisted long after fighting
Steady
ceased.
pace, men. Keep alert!
Independence arrived, burdened by unresolved costs. The significance of this moment lay not in celebration, but in recognition. The British government understood
Send
that
word to the
continuing
Marquis that the
war
attack has begun.
promised
We march
diminishing
at once.
returns. Reclaiming
It appears we are
territory
quite cornered,
would require
sir.
renewed
No flanking
investment
maneuver is possible.
without assurance
Indeed.
of lasting
We've
control.
exhausted our options.
Political will eroded as global commitments competed for attention. The war had ceased to serve imperial interest. The decision to end hostilities reflected calculation rather than concession. Britain retained power,
Move
but chose
lively,
not
you
to expend it
scallywags!
further
Form
in a
up!
conflict that no
Straighten
longer
that line,
aligned
Private!
with strategic
Eyes front!
priorities. The American cause did not force collapse. It imposed endurance. That endurance reshaped the cost structure of the war until withdrawal became rational. As fighting ended, uncertainty replaced urgency. Victory secured independence, but it did not guarantee stability. The conditions that enabled success in war offered
The
little
General
guidance
awaits the
for
news.
peace.
Aye, and
A
he
loose
shall have it before
coalition
sundown.
had defeated
Ride
the
on!
empire. Whether it could now govern itself remained unanswered.
Seems the winter will
The
be
moment
long
of
indeed.
decision, then,
We must hold the
was not
line,
confined
no matter
to a
the cost.
battlefield or a surrender ceremony. It extended beyond the end of combat into the unresolved future that followed. The war had been won, but its final test was only beginning. The American victory did not emerge from a single advantage, nor from an inevitable historical force. It resulted
there, the
from a
hearth is
chain of
gone.
conditions that
What is left
reinforced
for us
one
now?
another over time. Initial weakness forced strategic restraint. Strategic restraint preserved manpower. Preserved manpower allowed endurance. Endurance created political opportunity. That opportunity attracted external support, expanded the conflict, and raised the cost of continuation for the opposing enemy. Each link depended on the one before it. Remove any element, and the outcome becomes uncertain. The war was not won by defeating imperial power outright, but by altering the environment in which that power operated until withdrawal became the least costly option. This outcome challenges the idea that wars are decided by strength alone. The stronger side possessed superior resources, experience, and global reach. Yet those advantages required resolution to be effective. Without a clear path to decisive success, superiority became obligation. Each additional year demanded more investment for diminishing strategic return. The weaker side, by contrast, required only persistence. Survival itself functioned as progress. Victory, in this
Draft
sense,
of the Constitution,
was cumulative
detailing the framework of
rather
the new
than
government,
dramatic.
was the
The
result of
historical
extensive
lesson
revisions
is not
and
one
fraught
of destiny,
negotiations.
but of choice. At multiple points, different decisions could have altered the trajectory of the war. Persistence could have given way to collapse.
We must consolidate
External
our position
support
here
could
before
have
winter.
failed to
But if we yield
materialise.
this ground,
Imperial
we lose the river
leadership
entirely.
could have redefined
This
objectives
assembly hall
earlier.
must be finished
None of
before the
these
delegates
outcomes
arrive
were
next month.
predetermined.
We shall see to
What
it
shaped
immediately.
the final result was a pattern of decisions made under constraint. Leaders chose preservation over spectacle. They accepted limited success in exchange for long-term viability. The empire, meanwhile, repeatedly chose to pursue control without
The winter of
redefining
'78
the cost
tested the
it was
resolve
willing
of the
to
Continental
bear.
Army.
This video
Exhaustion and
invites
disease proved
reflection
as deadly as
rather
any
than
redcoat
celebration.
musket.
It suggests that victory often belongs not to those who seek decisive moments, but to those who understand endurance as
This
strategy.
new border leaves
The
Brunswick
American
exposed.
War of
The Commission has made its
Independence
decision.
reminds us
We
that
prepare
political
accordingly.
outcomes are frequently shaped by patience, adaptation, and the refusal to concede inevitability. If this conflict raises further questions,
Hard work,
they
this
are not
fence.
confined to
Aye.
this era
Are the
alone.
soldiers staying long?
Other
Seems
wars
so.
have
Best get
followed
used to it.
similar paths, where power failed
We
to
cannot
impose
sustain the garrison here
resolution
through winter.
and resistance
The supply lines are
reshaped
stretched
the
thin,
limits of
sir.
control.
We must
To
redraw the district
understand
boundaries.
those conflicts is to better understand how history moves, not in sudden triumphs, but in the accumulation of choices that quietly redefine what victory means. Sometimes the most consequential victories are not achieved on the battlefield, but in the moment when one side realizes that continuing the war no longer makes sense.